So, welcome everyone to our session on how an R1 University lab became CMMC compliant. I know there are a lot of people who really want to hear all of the details about this particular session, especially. So, I'm very excited to be here with Patricio Garcia from Kompleye. So, real quick, just want to let you know a little bit about me. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Noelle Vestal. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer here at PreVeil. I've actually implemented the 110 controls successfully at my previous organization, so I do understand the pain points behind that. I'm also a certified CMMC professional as well as a certified CMMC assessor, and I'm delighted to be joined with my friend and colleague from Kompleye, one of the certified C3PAOs out there that we partner with, Patricio Garcia. CEO and founder of Kompleye. Not only are you guys a C3PAO, but also a 3PAO for those people out there who are familiar with FedRAMP assessments and have conducted SOC 2 ISO assessments. There's not much you guys don't do, Pat. It seems like you do a little bit of everything. I love it. I'm really excited for this conversation because we're going to be discussing this groundbreaking case. We have a research lab at an R1 university that, to our knowledge, has become the very first educational institution to achieve a CMMC assessment. So if there are any others out there, let us know. Maybe we're wrong. But as far as we know, this is the first and only at this point. For legal reasons, we can't actually disclose who that customer happens to be. So we're just going to refer to them as the university. Just leave it at that. We're going to discuss what kind of challenges they faced, especially specific to their particular unique requirements and their unique challenges as being a research university facility, how they overcame those challenges, and 4 key lessons learned that can help you accelerate your own compliance journey as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So Patricio, can you tell us a little bit about this university? I mean, understanding that we can't give away too much information to identify who they are, but can you just give us a little bit of background on their setup?
Absolutely. And thank you, Noah, for having me. And thank you for the opportunity to share about our experience with the university as well. Well, our unnamed organization focuses on security, national security research and development, and they collaborate with the government, with agencies, and other academic institutions as well. So they have both a secret, top secret clearance as well as a CUI environment that they use for some DoD business as well.
Okay, awesome. So that's, probably a lot of people out there who have very similar setups, I would imagine. And what initially made them want to seek a CMMC certification?
Well, there are a couple of situations or requests they receive from DoD specifically and from their partners. Once they hear about or heard about CMMC, they strictly were required to get that certified as soon as possible. As I mentioned earlier, also they manage projects which involve CUI, secret, top secret information, and also they require kind of a robust cybersecurity program to meet all those standards established by their partners. So that's basically the two reasons it triggered a CMMC assessment for them.
So it sounds like it wasn't only just their DoD contracts and their DoD work, but also, like you said, their partners who were pushing them as well, which is a common scenario that we hear.
Yes, exactly. Because Title 48 is still under review. We expect Title 48 to come up anytime soon, right? So we are on the final stages of that regulation. But the partners, prime contractors, and subcontractors are the ones that are mostly, kind of pushing towards certification at this point. Kind of separate from the university, we've seen a lot of active requirements driven by prime contractors' requests.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. And it seems like universities are not immune to that.
Yes,
That's a
absolutely.
very good point to bring up. So let's talk about, because it is a university, and of course there are always going to be challenges with CMMC implementation. But I feel like with a university, there's very unique ones. What are some of the really unique to a university in implementing CMMC? What are some of those unique challenges that they had to overcome?
Well, I can think of probably a couple of maybe three. And let's just start with the economic one, right? So I think in terms of finances, the primary challenge is budgets. Universities often rely on grants or other public resources for funding, and that makes the implementation cost as well as the assessment complicated and difficult to manage. I believe probably the second one is related to the information technology departments. Though they might be knowledgeable, they are frequently overstretched or uncertain about how to initiate the process, how to start, where to start, what resources they need, and all that. And I think probably the third one in that list is that universities usually operate in silos, right? So they may have different projects. Let's say DoD has different research with multiple and contracts with multiple groups within the university, and then that creates a little bit of a complicated environment for the assessment itself. So sometimes universities may need multiple assessments because of that situation, right? So that's important to understand. And those programs are usually funded separately, so it's they are unable to share resources. So there is some, let's say, if they use a consulting company or some shared resources, that's going to be important for them as well to overcome that obstacle.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that from a university perspective, that siloing aspect, because, one of the differences that I definitely have seen with customers that are outside of university, you don't have usually that sort of issue. Everybody's kind of together. You can decide to silo off a certain part of your business, but everybody is, knowledgeable about what's going on. But you make a good point. Everybody's kind of their own independent little island when it comes to
Exactly.
CMC at a university. Yeah, that could cause definitely some strains for sure. So now that we've talked a little bit about the challenges that were faced by this university, maybe let's take a little bit of time and talk about the solutions that they found. So, how did they overcome these challenges? And really, what was their overarching strategy for really sort of attacking all these?
They began by separating environments. So they have, I mentioned, they have environments for top secret and secret, and then CUI environment as a separate one, right? So they separate both environments. They began by creating a separate environment for enterprise and a PreVeil CUI enclave. That approach reduced the technology and user footprint for the assessment, allowing a more efficient use of their resources. So in that sense, they focus on the requirements that were kind of important to them. And I think I can bring a graphic at this point. Let me just come up with that.
Yes, please.
When we start with an assessment, with PreVeil, the solution already indicates about a third of the assessment objectives. So that reduces the level of effort the organization needs to put into both the implementation and later on responding to the assessment, because a significant portion of those assessment objectives were already covered by PreVeil.
And you were already familiar with those, I assume, too, because of the fact that you're a partner with us.
That is correct. So in that sense, what we did is we mirror what you guys have with our technology, and we just leverage that and present this to the customer. So our assessors and our teams, they just need to focus on what matters, which are the two-thirds of the assessment objectives that are important and relevant to the technology. So that by doing it that way, we were able to kind of streamline the assessment process. The customer also save a tons of resources and time on providing information that was only the relevant to the assessment, and we were able to complete the assessment more efficiently in that sense.
Amazing. And this is an internal tool that you use at Comply, is that right?
Oh yes, this is our internal assessment tool that is available for our customers as well.
Love that. No, that's such a great visual. So thank you for bringing that up. It makes it much easier to really see how, PreVeil really can assist in speeding things up and making it, like you said, a less of a responsibility on the organization who's getting assessed. And I'm sure everybody out there wants to have a little bit less responsibility with an assessment.
Absolutely, it helps a lot.
Definitely. Wonderful. So thank you again for sharing that, Pat. So, what we obviously know that CMMC is all about protecting CUI, right? So, how are they choosing to protect their CUI? We know they're PreVeil customers, but what was their process for protecting and for sharing? Like, how do they transmit it outside of their organization when they need to, and that sort of thing? What was that process there with that CUI flow?
Well, the most important part is identify where you have CUI, either stored, processed, or transmitted to. So they inventory all these locations where they may potentially have CUI where the information is processed or transmitted to. With that, they also assess if they have any third parties that they transfer information to, for example, any subcontractors or any person or company that they use in order to process the information. They didn't have many, but they inventory every single location, every single connection. So they understood that portion first. So once that happened, then they implemented the PreVeil enclave So with that, they protected CUI within that enclave by providing this cloud-based end-to-end encrypted service for storing, sharing, and accessing that CUI that was part of their responsibility. So that is the way they protected the CUI flow and the CUI at the storage and during transmission as well.
And you had mentioned something that I love. This is this is something I harp on with our customers all the time. You said the first thing they did was figure out where that CUI is. What is we call that scoping the boundary. Why is that such an important step, do you think?
Well, that's key because without knowing what information is, you cannot protect those assets or those locations, right? So you need to identify them as the key and sensitive assets, so you can implement security protections over those assets, either if it's security locations or assets, infrastructure assets, or even people. So that is key and important in terms of defining your security measures and practices that need to be covered by your security program.
Makes total sense. I mean, how are you going to protect what you don't know you have, right?
Exactly.
Exactly. So, could you explain how they handled endpoints in their environment? I know a lot of people have questions about, well, and for those of you out there who are not sure what an endpoint is, that would be a laptop, a desktop, a server, anything like that would be processing, storing, transmitting CUI specifically. How did they address their endpoint challenges specifically?
That is a very good point. We have to be mindful that BDI has gained some popularity lately, especially after the rule was published, because now it's a narrow
Just real quick to interrupt. So, for those of you who don't know what a VDI is, a VDI is a virtual desktop infrastructure. Sorry, go right ahead, Pat.
Perfect. So it's basically a virtual endpoint, right?
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
computer in the cloud. So in that sense, those BDIs have gained popularity after the rule was published. It wasn't a thing before December 26th. So in that sense, many organizations began implementing CMMC months earlier before the rule was published. So in that sense, they secure endpoints by implementing antivirus solutions, implementing disk encryption on those laptops, adding vulnerability scanning tools to the environment, implementing multi-factor authentication for regular and previous users, as well as implementing a management device solution, an MDM solution. So that's how primarily especially this university, protected those assets. Now, in that sense, is BDI, although it provides additional security protections, both the encryption capability that PreVeil provides and the BDI itself are solutions that secure sensitive data under compliant requirements like CMMC. As I mentioned earlier, PreVeil provides that functionality or offers that end-to-end encrypted email and file sharing, and whereas BDI provides a centralized virtual desktop, so it makes it easy to manage those endpoints and remote access. So those both can complement your environment nowadays and contribute to security and compliance in different ways. So if they are not opposed items, they are also usually complement each other.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So, yeah, for those of you who aren't aware, the PreVeil works very well on VDIs. We do have customers who use VDIs in order to sort of, and again, remember, like the VDI, as Pat was saying, the VDI doesn't mean that you don't have any endpoint in scope. It just means you have one single endpoint in scope, the VDI, that everyone would access. And then those machines that anybody would access the VDI through would be just inputting machines, and they wouldn't actually be within your compliance boundary. So if you do have a lot of endpoints you're trying to secure and you're looking for a more sort of streamlined way, a VDI can be a great solution. Again, like you said, Pat, PreVeil works great on a VDI. But this organization decided not to go with that. Is that right, Pat? Mostly due
Yeah,
to
it wasn't
yeah,
VDI wasn't an approved out of scope asset at the time. So they implemented everything prior to the December 16 date when the rule went live.
that makes sense.
So yeah, in that sense, they went with the original design as they had it. Now, as you mentioned earlier, right? Some universities allow for BYOD. In that sense, BDI plus PreVeil is a better combination. If organizations don't have that practice, then BDI is just an extra cost. So we go back to the budget and cost issues funding. It is better to have or manage the endpoint that way.
Absolutely. And again, it's just letting everybody know that there are options here. And Prevail is very flexible on both of those. You obviously could secure all of your endpoints and have Prevail on them. You could have a VDI. It's really very much up to you, which is one of the nice things about CMMC. There's some flexibility there. Thank you for that. I think that was really important for us to spend some time on since, like you said, Pat, VDIs have only just recently, since the final rule came out, been officially okay to use and
Yeah.
everybody's on the same page. So I don't blame this university for erring on the side of caution and not going VDI when they weren't sure yet. That's makes total sense. Outside of the endpoint controls, which we know can be a challenge, we were just talking about that. What about documentation? Everybody's favorite conversation to have. We know that it's absolutely vital to have amazing documentation in your assessment. How did they handle the documentation challenge?
Well, they probably use PreVeil provided documentation and templates. I believe they have an special package that they acquire from PreVeil as well. So
Correct. Yep.
in that sense, that helped them to minimize the time that you spend building something from scratch. And because the technology, as I mentioned, and kind of leverages 110 requirements itself, then it helped them also to leverage that information and to minimize and to reduce the time they spend building up that SSP. Now we have to be mindful that we as assessors review the 320 assessment objectives, right? So that's what we expect to see, or most of us expect to see within the SSP, 320 assessment objectives that companies meet. So that's what was important in terms of the documentation. Prevail's documentation divides all the assessment requirements the way the assessors looks at the information, right? So we need to map one to one, and that's the way we map the tool as well. We map one assessment objective that comes from the SSP to one assessment objective what we test. Why is documentation important? We use three methods, three assessment methods: examination, interview, and testing. So 1/3 of the assessment is examination of documentation. So it's key and important that those documents address those individual assessment objectives, so we can minimize also the review time on the assessment side. And also on the maintenance side, you can, since the CMMC program is going to be here for the long term, you can have this SSP that is going to mature over time. But for the most part, once you set it up, it's easy to maintain. So the initial step on setting the document right is a key and an important part of the process. So having this pre-built documentation and templates from the start is a key portion of your implementation program.
Oh, wonderful. We love hearing that. Love hearing that feedback. And I also understand that they did a readiness assessment before their actual assessment. Do you think that that was in any way influenced? Like, was that influential in their success, do you think?
Absolutely. No, it was beneficial, definitely, because the only way to understand the requirements is by having a third party reviewing what you do, right? So if you do and check your own work, it's hard to see something that is missing. Whereas if you have a third party reviewing or checking what you did, it can sort of open your eyes to different scenarios and different ways to see things. In this particular case, they did a readiness assessment. It wasn't done by us; it was done by an RPO, but the methodology was the same, right? So they drilled down into the 320 assessment objectives. They review all the technologies that were used both for storing CUI and for protecting CUI. And also, they identify all the locations where CUI was either stored, transmitted, or processed. So with that, this person identify maybe additional assets that were in the scope. For example, if they use a cloud system that for some reason was used to transmit CUI but was not FedRAM authorized or equivalent, then they needed to change that design, right? So that has happened a couple of times now within our pre-assessments. We identify those situations. So having a person that kinds of reviews what you see, what you how you scope, how you plan to meet the requirements is really important. And in this particular case, it was key to their success.
Absolutely. And we always say, I mean, we say that all the time. You want to have somebody come in and double check your work. I don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars on an assessment just to find out that I could have had a readiness assessment before and caught a lot of those things and not failed my assessment. So it's a financial thing as well, honestly. Yeah.
Absolutely, especially with the new rule, right? There are 65 requirements that you cannot miss. Out of the 110, 65, if you fail them, you fail the assessment as a whole. You have to redo the assessment. So it's key and important to get that implementation, that pre-assessment done before the assessment itself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pat. So now that we're kind of wrapping up now in our last sort of 8 or 9 minutes that we have. So I know we've discussed a lot of big takeaways from this assessment, but let's sort of boil them down. We've got lesson one is about documentation. I mean, I feel like I always say documentation needs to tell a compelling story. Do you feel like what are some of the best documentation lessons that you've taken away from this particular assessment with this particular client?
I think the major lesson is, although they use your documentation and templates, they own them, right? They made them belong to them, meaning every single step, every single process they perform, they included within the document. So, and that's important because we have seen many times that organizations kind of have some discrepancies between what the practice states and the actual procedure, and that may have an assessment failing. So that's key and important. Documentation, owning the documentation, and making it yours is important for yourself understanding the requirement, and also for you defending what you are doing later during the assessment itself.
Right there. That was that right there, defending what is actually happening. That is so key. So, what Pat is talking about, for those of you who are not familiar, is we have the PreVeil Compliance Accelerator, which is an absolute ton of pre-filled documentation that can be used for artifacts, evidence. We have a pre-filled SSP. There's all kinds of information. But to Pat's point, it needs to be owned by you. So the organization needs to own those processes, those procedures, and what's in that documentation, because exactly to what Pat just said, you are the ones who are going to have to defend those processes and procedures in the middle of an assessment. So that's an excellent point. So let's jump to lesson number 2 that we've learned, I feel like, in this conversation, which is concerns about technology solutions and implementation for sure. Do you think, how did using a proven solution like PreVeil, do you think directly affected and impact their overall assessment process?
Well, it definitely helped from different perspectives, right? So if our assessors and our company, we know the controls, we know how a control is met, how those assessment objectives are incorporated into the solution. So in that sense, that derive us to understand how the solution and the technology addresses those requirements. And that match with a consistent implementation, it simplifies the verification on our side. For example, so we have this requirement, the assessment objective 3.1.1 alpha. We have the practice and we have the PreVeil guidance, right? So our assessors have the capability to check the guidance and to review these faster compared to other solutions. Why? Because we understand the solution, we have all the controls embedded within our assessment guidance as well. And it is consistent with the inheritance model that you have. For example, this is a shared control, so our assessor will just focus on the technology portion that is owned by the organization in this particular sense, right? So that it was important, understanding the technology, understanding how it is a control is met. We have, for example, controls that are fully inherited by. Let me see if I have one. For example, if we go through these assessments, right? So if the company doesn't have any additional technologies, but the ones that are covered by the scope, then our assessor will just pass this assessment because we understand that this is inherited. We don't have to do anything else, and it will be met.
Makes
So
total
this,
sense. Yeah.
so in that sense, as I mentioned, you have 110 of those requirements that are met from the start. So although we take a look at the body of evidence, making sure it is consistent with the DoD memo, but we already know that there is a portion of those controls that come as met from the start.
So we'll kind of jump through the last 2 lessons that we've learned in the last few minutes that we have. How much do you think that that readiness assessment that they did, how much that preparation, that additional preparation, how much do you think that really helped them?
I think it was key on for their success. Without having that readiness assessment done, I'm sure they may have missed a couple of requirements that are non-poemable, and that would be, catastrophic for the organization because, again, funding is an issue. Having to repeat an assessment, it doubles the cost, right? So that is important. So readiness was a big part of their preparedness and their success.
Absolutely. I thank you because I am always driving that home with our customers. So thank you for saying that. I think everybody here needs to hear that. And finally, our last lesson is really about leveraging resources. I know you just talked a bit about how wonderful it was to have the partnership that we have between PreVeil and Comply so that all of the assessors had understanding about PreVeil and how it works. But is there anything else in our partnership that you think played a role in the success here?
I think within that same line of thought, having the PreVeil compliance team and other resources available, just by calling them or just being available anytime, it provides additional kind of comfortness, and it was crucial for their success as well. I remember when they had some questions in terms of how to meet or how the body of evidence meet the requirements, there was always someone available for them to answer at any point during the assessment process. So again, having that support was key and important during the assessment as well.
And in fact, I mean, I have to mention, we even had lunch at one point, you and I, to answer some of those questions.
Yeah.
We Prevail very much believes in collaboration. So I mean, even if that's an in-person lunch with one of our awesome partners, then we're happy to do that too. So absolutely. Well, thank you. So in the last couple minutes here, we'll just summarize a little bit. So this has been an absolutely enlightening conversation, and thank you so much, Pat, for joining us. We've talked about how to create an enclave to limit your scope. We've talked about implementing a proven solution like PreVeil to protect your CUI. We talked about how to develop documentation and how important that development of documentation is. And then also partnering with compliance experts like PreVeil and Comply, people who do have an understanding of what's actually really required to have a successful CMMC implementation. So, Pat, do you have any final thoughts as we close up?
Well, I think as you mentioned, right, you keep getting ready is key, and finding the right partners is key as well. So that's an important part of your success. So I highly recommend you guys focusing on those two.
Thank you. And my last thought is just don't go at it alone. This is a lot to do. So absolutely, like Pat said, reach out to those partners and those people who can really help you, those experts in CMMC who can get you the rest of the way.